Welcome back, everybody. So today we're going to be looking into and start to investigate the idea of de-radicalization and start to try to get an understanding of how we can prevent people from joining terrorist organizations. And then once they actually have joined a terrorist organization, what's the process by which these individuals can leave these groups? And so we're going to have a general discussion about this process and think about it, try to get an understanding of some of the broad theoretical concepts behind certain strategies of de-radicalization. But then we're also going to, in the case study, look at some interviews with people who used to be part of far-right extremist terrorist organizations and how they managed to come back from being part of those groups. So let's just dive right in. So what we're going to do today, we're really going to try to look at how we address radicalization in three various stages. And those are anti-radicalization, and this is where we're trying to even create a buffer and prevent the radicalization process from even beginning. So this is like pre-radicalization or very, very, very early stages of radicalization. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more to see what are some strategies and how we try to even prevent this process from beginning. And then we're going to look at the idea of counter-radicalization. We're going to look at what strategies, what processes can be undertaken to try to prevent individuals who are in the process of being radicalized. What can be done to try to prevent that from furthering and prevent those individuals from becoming fully part of the movements they're being drawn towards. And then finally, we're going to look at disengagement and de-radicalization. These are two different terms with distinct meanings that we're going to discuss a little bit more, but this is really in the post-radicalization period. These are the individuals who have fully committed to their cause, to their organization, and this is the process of bringing those individuals back from the extreme. So let's start out by looking at anti-radicalization, and this really is truly a prevention goal. We're trying to deter individuals from even becoming part of the process of radicalizing. And how do we do this? Well, there's a lot of ways to think about different strategies to prevent radicalization. And some of these we'll see are similar across all of these different processes of anti-radicalization, counter-radicalization, and then the disengagement, de-radicalization. Is this links and development of programs that link communities, families, and government, all working in tandem to try to prevent this. And really, one of the key elements of helping to have a strong anti-radicalization program is just in general having a very robust, healthy civil society. And for those of you who have taken Government 120, or probably even American government, comparative politics, you've probably learned some elements about what civil society is, looking at the social networks that exist in society, the idea of social capital and the importance of that to civil society, thinking about the level of trust that individuals have within a society, that building of those social networks, reciprocity, cohesion that really holds a society together. And having strong levels of social trust, interconnection with groups of people in a society is really important for this anti-radicalization process because it really, in ways, limits the number of individuals who may end up on the fringes, who may feel disconnected, left out, not plugged into a particular society. And those individuals, as we've discussed before, are much more ripe to be targeted by extremist groups and then ultimately potentially join those extremist groups. And then also it just limits the possibility of homegrown domestic terrorist groups from emerging when you have a robust civil society that really does foster inclusion, trust, understanding between a large, diverse group of people. And another important element of this as well is also just the idea of education. Having a solid educational program that brings people in contact with different ideas, different worldviews. Really strong, robust education is important in this anti-radicalization from the start. So people have the capacity, awareness to identify think about why these extreme views are not where they want to go, what they want to align with. And this is very important as well. And then another important element, and this is especially true for the government and for private companies, is really denying these extremist groups from even having a platform to function at the outset. And so we can see this in certain examples where groups like Twitter or Facebook try to limit and deny the platform of groups that engage in extremist rhetoric. Or even if they don't simply remove it, they flag certain content as being extreme, as being encouraging of violence, things like this. And this is really important for the government and these private organizations to work together to try to even deny a platform from the outset where these groups can actively get their message out to try to convert a lot of people to their particular cause. So anti-radicalization, we see here certain elements of strong civil society, strong connections between civil society and the government. The government has the capacity to provide funding for programs that ensure that individuals have healthy outlets to focus their energies on rather than becoming sucked into these extremist groups, feeling marginalized and being willing to dabble in these extremist ideas. So here we can see a lot of these, with a strong anti-radicalization program in a healthy society, healthy community, we can really go a long way in trying to prevent the radicalization process from ever beginning. But this isn't always the case, right? We see even in the most healthy societies, there are often people who can end up on the fringes. And so now we arrive at the next step where we deal with the idea of counter-radicalization. And counter-radicalization has an aim of mitigating those individuals who have begun to engage with extremist ideas and who are in the process of radicalizing. So these are individuals who we really have worried that they are on the fence. They have begun to dabble in extremist views, extremist ideologies, so we have real concerns about them moving and becoming fully fledged members of particular organizations, completely adopting these extremist ideologies. So counter-radicalization has a number of different strategies that they try to take. And this is, just looking at one example. Here, put up a picture here of Ralph Goodall, the Canadian Public Safety Minister. Canada has been pretty active in developing a lot of counter-radicalization strategies to try to combat individuals who are in the process of potentially becoming terrorists and engaging in extremism. And so what are some of the ways that counter-radicalization works? Well, an important element, again, as I said, is this development of community governmental links. So trying to develop programs, the government may be influential in providing funding for communities to create programs that allow them to engage in certain counter-radicalization strategies. And so there are a few counter-radicalization strategies. One of those would be called counter-grievance. And so this is where you have community organizations that really try to identify what are the particular issues that individuals are latching onto to make the grievance and to make a particular grievance about what's wrong with society and to really provide them a justification for moving to extremism and moving to terrorism. Because when they see this grievance that they think is not being addressed, this can be a call to action for them to join these extremist groups. So a lot of the goals of counter-radicalization is to try to address this issue, try to either, one, address if it truly is an issue, or two, even just providing a means of thinking about the issue differently if this grievance perhaps doesn't truly exist but is seen more as, even if it's perceived to exist, this can be as harmful as if it truly exists. These counter-grievance programs can try to help deal with both of these issues, actually addressing the issue if it exists, or two, trying to help individuals understand why their particular grievance might not be actually accurate. So this is an important thing. Another is the idea of counter-ideology, and this is really important with community organizations coming together, and even governments or agencies, programs like Department of Homeland Security does some of these programs where they run town halls where they discuss these issues, these extremist ideologies, and try to speak out against that. And a lot of what they'll try to do is bring individuals who have moderate voices in a particular ideology to come and speak to individuals who may be flirting with these more extremist views. So we see this, a lot of examples, we see this with individuals in Muslim communities where individuals, imams who are quite moderate will try to speak out against more extremist fringe Islamic ideologies to try to help show these individuals that these ideas are really on the extreme. This is not the mainstream. This isn't what most people believe, to really try to provide a counter to that particular ideology, especially by speaking to these individuals within their own ideology, within their own terms. Whereas having a moderate Muslim imam speak to someone who's moving towards the extreme of Islam has a much more resonating effect than, say, a Christian pastor who's trying to talk to somebody who's moving to the extremes in Islam, because they're speaking the same language at that point. They're within the same religious faith, same ideology, and this allows a greater engagement with those individuals to try to help pull them back from fully engaging in the extremist ideology. And another way is the idea of what we call counter mobilization. And counter mobilization is really trying to build these positive networks that individuals can join to prevent them from really starting to take action, to start to join these groups, perhaps join their marches, join into their organizations, to try to provide outlets and opportunities for them to engage in positive social networks and mobilize them in a way that they feel like they're making a difference in their lives, but not being mobilized by the organization that is engaged in the extremist ideology and extremist agenda. So this is another way. And then again, through all of these things, families are important as well, because families are very important for helping to identify to communities, to the government, individuals who may be moving towards these more extremist views. And this is where you really need strong family elements to try to be there as well to help bring these individuals back. And family becomes especially important once we get to this final stage that we're going to talk about, when we talk about the ideas of disengagement and de-radicalization. So how do we distinguish between these two? Well, disengagement is the idea of getting individuals who still hold extremist views and belief to give up violence. And the objective here is, though, even though they may still hold extremist views, they've abandoned the idea that violence is the means to achieve these goals. And this is an important step, and this is a step that is often one of the first goals of communities, governments, to try to target individuals who have already moved to the extremes, who have adopted these ideologies. Because even if they hold these extreme views, if they can be brought back from their willingness to engage in violence, well, then perhaps there's a way to continue to reach them and move ultimately to what we'll talk about next, de-radicalization, where they transform their views. But really, this is important as well, because these individuals still have considerable amount of hate, extreme ideologies that they still support, but they're not going to act in a violent manner to achieve those objectives. And there's a lot of ways that the communities, the government can be involved in trying to help promote disengagement. And some important elements are, one of the most important elements that's been seen to help individuals at least disengage from being willing to act in violent ways for their particular ideology is what has been considered the development and fostering of a negative perception of an extremist group. So if communities, families do an effective job of painting the extremist group that an individual belongs to in a negative fashion, and they do so effectively, this can really help disengage individuals from being willing to act in violent ways. Because if they become a bit disillusioned with their group, they may not necessarily be as willing to go to the extreme in terms of the actions they'll commit to carry out that group's ideology. And this, again, also is important for providing motivations for these individuals to stop engaging in and give up a willingness to engage in violence to carry out their cause. So providing motivations, whether it's negative, creating a sense of fear of punishment, fear of being arrested, going to jail, being killed in pursuit of their particular agenda, or building positive motivations as well, trying to help them develop a sense of the real human cost that their violent actions is going to create. The lives are going to damage. To really try to reach them on a human level is an important way to foster disengagement. Tap into an internal sense that there's qualms against acting violently. There's real human repercussions to this. And so this is important to try to do to get individuals to abandon a sense of disengagement. And a lot of counterterrorism strategies really focus on this first, because the idea is ideally we can get to a sense where we can de-radicalize, change their ideas, but first we need to just ensure these individuals aren't going to be willing to engage in violence anymore. Because if we can save human lives, we need to do that first, and then we can work to rehabilitate the individual who had these radical views next. So let's jump right into that. That's the final step, de-radicalization. And this is the process by which individuals not only forswear violence, but they also have an internal psychological transformation. They change their views. They give up their allegiance to a particular cause, a particular violent extremist ideology, and they look to return to society, to become reintegrated into society and no longer have these extremist views. And oftentimes we see a lot of these individuals, once they achieve and are de-radicalized, these become some of the individuals who are most vocal and most engaged in trying to help other people ultimately disengage, de-radicalize, or even they can be involved in the anti-radicalization and counter-radicalization programs, because they were individuals by which the anti-radicalization and counter-radicalization programs didn't work. And perhaps they can be influential in trying to understand and develop further strategies and better strategies to make those programs more effective. And this is really some important elements that we see, and I think you'll see in the case studies today and a lot of the interviews and research on de-radicalization sees the importance of familial links and community links and playing a really significant role in helping these individuals come back from the brink. And a lot of the stories that you'll hear today when you watch a case study, focus on how their families, the birth of a child, a relationship with a loved one, really plays an important role in helping these individuals ultimately de-radicalize. And we do, though, have to ask a lot of questions about this, because I'll pose this as your first discussion question, is discussion question one: to what extent do you think it's possible for extremists to truly change their views? Again, discussion question one: to what extent do you think it's possible for extremists to truly change their views? This is an important thing for us to think about. These individuals who have gone to the extremes in particular ideologies, how much do we really think they have the capacity to change? Do we believe that they have? There are always concerns about recidivism, that they could ultimately slip back into their radical ideologies. And so it's always important to think about de-radicalization as an active process. It doesn't just happen and it's done. It's a continuing process to ensure individuals no longer will engage with those ideas. And finally, I just want to end with your final discussion question. That's discussion question two. And that is the fact that even these individuals who de-radicalize, some of the interviews you'll see are individuals who now work to try to prevent others from engaging in violent acts and joining violent groups. They've done horrendous things. They've hurt people. They've killed people. They've done true acts of terror. And that's really hard to think about. And so with your final discussion question I want to ask you is, are extremists who have committed violent acts redeemable? Again, discussion question two: are extremists who have committed violent acts redeemable? And so when you're answering this, you can explore the idea of what redeemable means. I'll leave this open-ended because I'm really curious to see what you all will come up with when you're assessing and thinking about this question. So we'll leave it there for today. You'll have your case study next, and thanks again for listening.